Honey, I finally finished putting together the Patreon page.
Oh, good. I'm so happy. Now we can
good.
offer all that bonus content that we've been looking to offer and the Patreon only merch that's exclusive to Patreon, plus all the monthly Zoom hangs with you and me. And the membership start at only $5 per month. Thank you so much for your support, right? And how can everyone find us on Patreon?
You can go to patreon.com/The Only One Podcast, or you can click the link in the bio. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. See you there. Zoë Ruderman, hi. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So I did a little research on the accent over your E in your name.
Yes.
Which I don't see very often, to see that accent. And it is, what I found is the accent La Trema is what it's called.
So it's called a whole bunch of different things. I think it's typically a diaresis. A lot of people call it an umlaut. I found out recently.
Umlaut, I found that as well.
It is not on my birth certificate. So I guess if we're being really official, it's not in my name, but it's on every other document I have. And I'm like 50-50 on using it on emails. So if you're using it, you're ahead of me sometimes.
So tell me what that accent does to the E in your name.
Yeah, so it basically separates out the O and the E. So like if you look at the name Joe, you know not to say the E, whereas if you put the accent, the two dots over it, you would separate out the sound of the E. So you'll see it on some words like in very fancy publications if they say things like cooperate, like the New Yorker will put the diaresis or the umlaut on the second O so that it's not cooperate. So it basically just separates out the vowels. But it doesn't really help because I still get called Zoe all the time.
All the time?
Yes.
That was my next question. But I quite enjoyed it. And like I said, I don't see it too often. And I always ask people who spell their name Zoe, is it Zoe or Zoe? Before, so just
I have to say I blame Rachel Zoe for people who call me Zoe.
Yes, you should. You should.
I'm calling her out right here. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. I am Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is The Only One in the Room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hey, honey.
Hey, honey. So today we are talking to Zoë Ruderman. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her.
All right.
Zoë was named editor of People Digital in January of 2018. So that's 3 years ago, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. In her nearly 4 years at the helm, almost 4 years at the helm.
Coming up on that.
She is, coming up on that. She has led the team to incredible growth and expansion, launching on new platforms and launching new verticals and transforming the staff into data-driven, insights-fluent, into a data-driven, insights-fluent newsroom. She is a rare editorial leader with the ability to focus on both quality and compelling journalism, as well as monetization. Got to get that. That's good. And the reason she's here is because she is also the host of a new podcast called Me Becoming Mom, where she talks to celebs like Hoda Kotb and Kandi Burruss and Jillian Michaels and Alyssa Milano about everything from trying to conceive for years to surprise pregnancies, IVF to surrogacy, adoption to unexpected home births. So thank you and welcome, Zoë.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Scott. Nice to be here.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
I always start by asking everyone how they identify.
In terms of pronouns?
Sure, or whatever. But it started with pronouns, yes.
Sure, yes. She, her, hers works for me.
Okay. Another way that I know you identify, because we talked about it, is sex positive, which I just thought was a really great identification. And after I read some of your written work in your articles, I found that to be very accurate.
Yeah, I started my journalism career at Cosmo. It's hard to last at Cosmo more than a minute if you are not sex positive. So yeah, I like that as my identifier. Yeah, why not? We should all be sex positive.
Right, right. So I just want to say a few of the titles of your articles that I read.
Oh no, now you're going to embarrass me and I'll have to tell my parents not to listen to this. But sure, go on.
Oh no, wait, your parents haven't read the articles?
They read every single thing I wrote. So this will just be a reminder. It will not be new information. And actually, my parents are very sex positive. So I'm really just kidding. Go right ahead.
Good. Okay. So 23 facts you should know about vaginas. I think that's like everybody should read that.
That's a health
the
story,
G-spot is
to be fair.
Is what?
It's a health story, to be fair.
It is a health story.
Yeah.
Exactly. In it, you say that the G-spot is a lie, which is a really interesting paragraph. So everyone should go and check out that article. 25 ways to turn on a man. 10 weird things that turn guys on. That was really interesting. That was a good read. And a little known fact about your guys' package, which I started to talk to Scott about, but it made him queasy. So
I'm going to have to go back and read some of
I
these.
won't even bring it up again.
Yeah, it turned it. I feel like I evolved out of that particular thing that you were trying to explain. So it had to do with spiked penises and
it did
evolution.
and monogamy, which
monogamy.
I thought was really interesting. And the question that you pose is: are we monogamous by nature? Because we've evolved out of this thing this tool, as it were, to allow primates, right, to mate without having interference from other male of the species.
Yeah, this is where I said, let's change the conversation here, honey.
I'm trying to put it delicately, but I thought that the end question was really interesting. Like, does that mean that we are a monogamous species because of that? So anyway, if you haven't checked out Zoe's articles, you should definitely check them out. They are sex positive, but they're just they're fun and they're good information, and there are lots of them. So you can definitely go through and find lots of fodder for conversation. But now I want to talk about me becoming mom. Yeah. And so you really, really beautifully interview other moms about their journey to motherhood. I mean, and this is what I was saying at the top of the podcast. I'm really excited about this talk because I love the Hoda Kotb story and me becoming mom. First of all, it made me pull over. I pulled over and got teary. It's from the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Right?
I think I was crying 45 seconds in.
Yes. Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
And then again. It's so emotional. It's so beautiful. And she does not, her story is not getting pregnant and giving birth to her two daughters. She has her daughters in a different way. And that's what you guys talk about. And then you talk about to Kandi Burruss, who was, a mother in 4 different types of ways, which you pointed out. A stepmom. She's used a surrogate, right? And
she used a surrogate. She carried a baby through IVF. She became a stepmom, and then she had a baby. Unexpectedly, she got pregnant without trying.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It was really.
And what did you
important
call that?
me.
Low intervention.
I called it that she got pregnant with low intervention, and she got a real kick out of that. I think because I was trying to sort of medicalize it, but I'm a big fan of talking in those kinds of terms. I try not to say natural birth on the podcast. I definitely don't say things like became a mom in normal ways. We really are trying to be inclusive. The goal of this podcast is to open up these conversations that just don't happen enough and to destigmatize. You mentioned the Kandi Burruss episode. She talks about, especially in the Black community, surrogacy is taboo and looked down upon, and still is. And she talks about a family member who reached out to her and was like, aren't you worried you're not going to bond with your baby? And I think that we can do a great service by kind of cracking open these conversations. So it was really important to me when we decided to move forward with this podcast that we speak to all different women who show all different paths. It shouldn't just be I got married, I got pregnant, I had a baby. This is what happened. So, we launched with Hoda because she has this incredible story of she became a mom and she's a fantastic mom. She's never been pregnant. She's never given birth, but that has not changed the incredible mother that she was able to become. So I think you'll hear in the next, handful of episodes, there's even more diversity in terms of birth stories and journeys. So yeah, I think it's important that we kind of show there are so many different paths to motherhood and to parenthood.
Yes. And what that identity actually means, motherhood, right?
Yeah, right.
Because some people have very strong ideas about, well, you're not a mother if blank, blank, blank. Or you are a mother if blank, blank, blank.
Or you're more of a mother, okay, you're a stepmom, but that's not enough, or that's not as good as something else, and sort of putting it all in a spectrum.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I call Scott's daughters my bonus daughters. I did not like the word stepmom. But bonus daughters felt like, because they are a bonus. I have boys. I didn't have girls. And so this is a bonus that I get to have these two beautiful young women in my life.
I love that so much. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and everybody's experience is different, but there's so much room for connection there. And there doesn't need to be kind of a hierarchy of motherhood, which is what I hear you talking about in your podcast. That thing that you just said, more of a mother. She's more of a mother than I am because, so tell me how did you become a mom? What was your journey?
Yeah, so I became a mom in June of last year. So I'm still sort of a newish mom. And that was probably no surprise given that I'm the host of this podcast. It was after a winding road, and it was a road that, I should say, like winding, bumpy, surprising, all of the adjectives, not a straight, smooth road. It wasn't what I expected. I think a lot of us, grow up thinking, here's how you get pregnant. I certainly, I was lucky enough to have sex ed, which is not even a given anymore, but you basically are taught if you have sex, you'll probably get pregnant. So be really, really careful. It was never even covered that a pregnancy might not end in a birth of a baby after 9 months. You're sort of taught the very textbook version of what happens. And so I had my son last June, and that was after 3 miscarriages and 5 rounds of IVF. And with each step of that, it was very eye-opening because, to steal the name of your show, I felt like the only person in the room at each of those turns. And of course, I knew logically and rationally that I was not the first woman to have a miscarriage. I was not the first woman to go through IVF. I'm not that self-centered. I know there are other people who have gone through this, but when you're in that moment, because it's not something people talk about and it's not something that at least I was not prepared for, and I didn't go into it thinking like, oh, there's a 1 in, however many chances that this happens to me, it feels like such a shock. And you think like, how do people go through this? So it has been really illuminating for me to go through it and then to talk to other women. And I think, as is the case with so many things, when you think you're the only person who goes through something, the moment you bring it up with, in my case, other women, they say like, oh yeah, I had a miscarriage too, or I did IVF, or my sister, or my mom, or my best friend, or we're thinking about that. And it was this feeling of like stories came out of the woodwork. And on one hand, I thought like, how terrible that all of these women went through this, but there was a sense of community and comfort. And I recently interviewed Shawn Johnson East, who's the Olympic gymnast, who we spoke. Yes. She was really candid, and she talked about she had a miscarriage, and she felt the same way. She was totally unprepared for it. And then she said when she started sharing it with her many followers, it was the same thing. Like all of these stories come out of the woodwork. And she said it was like, at the same time, the saddest thing and the most wonderful thing to kind of hear that there were all these other women. So yeah, I had a very winding road that in my case, it ended happily, but it, I can't just say like, oh, the ending was great, so that's the end of the story. It was
Right.
certainly difficult.
Well, and it's 1 in 4 women who experience miscarriage, which is, I mean, those are incredible odds that it's going to be a part of your path to having a baby, if that's what you choose to do.
Yeah.
And, if you had 1 in 4 odds of anything, that's a probability, right? It's not just a possibility.
And, it's a good point. Like if you had 1 in 4 odds of something else, you would probably be aware of what those odds are, and you would go into it with open eyes. But not so with this for some reason.
Yeah. And I just wanted to read you something that I found. I'm sure you're familiar with James and Kimberly Vanderbeek's journey.
Of course, yeah.
And his hashtag, or their hashtag that they created, WeNeedANewName. And this is what he said on his Instagram. Miscarriage in an insidious way suggests fault for the mother, as if she dropped something or failed to, quote unquote, carry. From what I've learned, in all but the most obvious extreme cases, it has nothing to do with anything the mother did or didn't do. So let's wipe all the blame off the table before we even start. And then he says that was his first of all. And then second of all, he says, it'll tear you open like nothing else. It's painful and it's heartbreaking on levels deeper than you may have ever experienced. So don't judge your grief or try to rationalize your way around it. And I did want to talk to you about miscarriage because I want to talk about it. I don't think, again, that I think this is an avoided subject. Yeah. I think it's spoken about in whispers. I think there's a cloak of shame over it. And then the odds are 1 in 4. So many people go through this. And I also looked this up. There are, and there are probably more than this, but I found that there were 13 different types of miscarriages online.
I didn't realize that. It doesn't surprise me. Yeah. In my research, I sort of felt like, oh, it's very binary or black and white. You either have a successful pregnancy or you don't. But yeah, there's so much nuance that I had to learn and was very surprised by. So I'm not surprised to hear that it's 13 different kinds.
Yeah. And so that just goes to like how much is not discussed, right?
Yeah.
Because neither you or I know that. We're grown women.
Yep.
And we I'm not going to say should, but we could be at a point in our lives where this has been in our dialogue forever. So we're really well versed by the time we get to the age where we want to have children that these things are possible. But I wasn't. It wasn't discussed with me at all. It wasn't discussed with me by my OBGYN when I was trying. I did not hear my girlfriends talking about miscarriage. And if I did, it was very much like in the dark, right? Like they stayed home and they don't come out until after they're finished grieving, and then it's okay to talk about.
And I would say even one step further, what I've noticed is they don't come out and talk about it until they've then gone on to have a healthy pregnancy and have a baby. So it's like, until I have this like, rainbow at the end or this like I did it moment, it's kind of like, let's wait until it's fully in my past. That's a chapter that I've already ended before I'm really comfortable talking about it. Obviously it's different for women.
I mean, I think that's so true. And, I don't know. I guess that's survival, right? It's something instinctual that we want to just, or is it? I don't even know if it's instinctual. I don't know if it's something that society places on us.
I think it's probably a mix. I can only speak for myself. And for me, it was a defense mechanism. It was that I didn't want to manage other people's feelings and I didn't want to educate them. So it's natural that people would have questions and wonder about things. And I just felt like I am having a hard enough time with my own feelings and processing this grief, because it's grief. And I found like I'm very much an empath, and I just felt like, the few people that I did tell about this, it was like, and now I have to manage them being sad and how are they feeling about this? And I had this like I mean, this probably says something about me and the therapy that I need, but I had this like gut instinct to be like, but it's going to be okay. And I'm sure it's going to end fine. And the likelihood that I get pregnant and have a baby. And I thought like, that's not where I want my head to be. And I remember, someone at work saying like, oh, I would tell people as soon as I found out I was pregnant because I would want to tell them if it didn't go well. And I thought, oh my God, that's the last thing I would want to do is forget like it wasn't about shame. It wasn't about secrecy or even privacy. It was just like, I don't want to have to go through that conversation and manage how you're feeling and answer your probably well-intentioned questions, but not questions I really want to answer right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, same. Yeah. I was very cautious. I waited until, it was a viable pregnancy before, I told anyone both times. And I don't like managing other people's feelings. And I know that that's something like I'm 13 plus years sober, and that's something that I talk about. And what I get sometimes back is pity, or like validation. Oh, good for you.
Interesting.
I'm like, well, yeah, it is good for me. But I'm not doing it for anyone's approval. But I talk about it, or pity. But I talk about it because I know that it's helpful in the dialogue, that I'm this far away from my last drink. This is what my life looks like now. So this is possible, right? But it wasn't obviously, my journey here was not the journey I would have chosen for myself, but I went through it, and this is where I ended up. I got to imagine it's something similar, or it must feel similar to you because you're talking about this now, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I feel the same way you do, that, the goal of all of this is to reach other women who might feel shame or guilt about whatever it is they went through. I spoke to an OBGYN who specializes in things like loss, and she said every emotion is valid when you have a pregnancy loss, whether it's the day after you found out you were pregnant, whether you're, in your third trimester and it happens. She said every emotion is valid except for guilt and shame. And that really stuck with me. And I think that what you're saying kind of echoes with that, the idea of, you want us talking about this, like someone else will hear this and be like, wow, I can talk about this and I feel comfortable, and there are other women who have gone through this. So that's really been our goal with this podcast from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Can you, and I don't know, you can absolutely say no and you don't want to discuss it, but could you tell me a little bit about the miscarriage that you had, that you and I talked about, and
Sure.
what it was like around that? Yeah.
Yeah. So my first miscarriage, after I found out that it was, I went in, there was no heartbeat. A few weeks later, my OBGYN said, so I had a D&C, which is the surgical procedure to clean out the uterus. And she said, like, do you know what a molar pregnancy is? And I didn't. And she said, well, we're sending, the tissue sample to see what it is. And she kind of like brushed it off. And then, of course, I did what anyone does when they leave the doctor's office. I Googled it standing right outside on the street on Park Avenue, and terrified myself, and then read all of the articles on the subway ride home. But so it turned out that it was a partial molar pregnancy. And so what that means is that basically we had seen a heartbeat. So there was, there was a fetal pole, but there were also basically like an extra set of embryos. So it was essentially like there were two sets of embryos. And a molar pregnancy is when it's never even considered an embryo. You would get a positive pregnancy test because your hormone levels rise, but it's not viable. Whereas a partial molar, which is even more rare than a molar pregnancy, is when there is, the developing embryo, but then this extra set of chromosomes. So, it was so rare. My mom has her PhD. She's been a scientist for like 50 years. She didn't really know what it was. She has studied, she's an embryologist. I found it very hard to find information. My OBGYN actually referred me to someone else because she said, like, I don't, and this is like, a New York City OBGYN who, like, the waiting room is always packed.
Yeah.
And she said something, I said like, oh, have you not dealt with this? And she said, oh, actually once I did have someone who, went through this. And I thought, once in your entire career? And then, it's just to sort of highlight the level of how rare this is. My mom had reached out to some of her like colleagues in the medical community, just kind of trying to get like recommendations and references. And she said, there's a study going on, I forget what institution, and they're looking for people who have gone through this. And, they would really love to kind of follow your case because, they can only find like 13 people for this. So talk about almost the only one in the room. But it's a lot to navigate. Anytime you're the only one in the room in any situation, whether it's difficult or not, it's just a lot to manage and navigate. And this wasn't the kind of thing where it was like, oh, go on a Facebook group or Google it or go on, what to expect when you're expecting.com and just kind of find the group. There just wasn't a lot out there. And this, I did not tell a lot of people at all. I'm a very private person. But as I did start to tell people, it was like, exactly what we were just saying. You are then in the position to educate them. And I am happy to do that and willing. But when you're going through it in the moment and you're like, I don't want to be seen as like a medical case.
Right.
So it's a lot to manage. And I remember, months and months later, maybe a year later, sitting in a news meeting at People, and there was some story of a real woman, and the headline was something, I don't remember exactly, but it was like, woman has molar pregnancy, and, and then sort of the outcome, and everyone, a bunch of women, many of whom had kids, said like, oh, I've never even heard of that. Do you know what that is? And I just thought like, oh, yeah, interesting.
I do.
But yeah, right. And so what's sort of interesting or unique about this is that because I don't actually know why, but you have to be monitored by an oncologist for 6 to 12 months after the end of the pregnancy, because you have there's concern that it can turn into a cancer actually, and that it could spread to your lungs. That's incredibly, incredibly rare, but because it's so serious, you're monitored. So that also means you can't get pregnant for 6 to 12 months after your hormone levels come down. So for me, it was like the hits just kept coming. It was like, it's a miscarriage, but oh, by the way, it's not even a quote normal miscarriage. Okay, so we've dealt with it. Oh, by the way, you're ready to get pregnant right away. And what many women are told, and what I have heard to be very true from OBGYNs, is you're a little bit more fertile after a miscarriage. So some women sort of see the silver lining as like, okay, I lost the pregnancy, but my body is set up, I can do this right away. I had to wait. I couldn't. We had to be very, very careful. I think it ended up being something like 8 months for me. So it was just one of these things where it was like, oh, and now I'm waiting. So yeah, it was a lot to take in, and a lot of trying to educate myself during that time.
Wow. Your mom is an embryologist. Is that what you said?
So she is a biologist, and she specialized in embryology, marine biology. Now she's focused on hormonal and environmental disruptors. She's a brilliant, brilliant person.
Yeah. Well, what an amazing resource to have while you're going
through
this.
Yeah. Partly because she can be both an emotional support and also an informational support. So as soon as I told her, which was immediately, she researched it on her own, so she wasn't peppering me with questions. She looked at doctors who specialize in this, when I would kind of be spiraling about and now I have to see an oncologist. She's like, well, but let's look at the actual data behind this. The likelihood that something happens is incredibly rare. I don't think you need to worry about it. This is what you'll do. She was a really incredible support system because of her background.
And then, and thank you for talking about that and letting us in on kind of the inner world of that experience, because one, like you said, it is so rare, and two, it happened to you. And that's really personal, and I really appreciate you being so candid. I'm curious about when you were in that period of time where you were being monitored, were you thinking, I got to have a baby any way that I can have a baby, or I really want to conceive and carry a baby and give birth to it, or what were you thinking during that time?
That's a good question. I think that I just sort of assumed naively, like, and we'll get pregnant again and then I'll have a baby. I never questioned it. Like, we weren't starting to think about other options. We weren't, certainly the idea of IVF was not in my head. Adoption wasn't in my head. It was like, we've had this bump along the road. The more you research, the more you realize miscarriage is common, even if this particular kind is very uncommon. So it was just like, this is upsetting and sad and frustrating, and this is a loss. But I never had like a pivot at that point. That didn't come until later. So it was, I think I was so sort of like enveloped in just the emotion of it and getting through, okay, waiting till that okay from the doctor of you can get pregnant again, that my head just didn't go there, which is probably some sort of defense mechanism mixed in with a little bit of blissful ignorance.
Yeah. So what did happen next?
So we were given the okay to get pregnant again. You know, they'd monitored me for however many months. We got pregnant. Excuse me, we got pregnant right away. I have a friend who jokes that like my husband looks at me the wrong way and I get pregnant. Like, we're very, very fortunate that, or I should say looks at me the right way, not the wrong way.
Yes.
We're very fortunate that I get pregnant easily. So I got pregnant again, had another miscarriage. This was a more typical miscarriage, which is to say unexplained, which is the majority of early miscarriages. So a lot of people feel frustrated by the fact that there is no explanation. We were surprised again, because you think like, okay, we've gone through this once. There's not much of an increased risk, or there might be no increased risk of a second miscarriage. Once you have a second miscarriage, though, your risk of another one starts to increase. So had a second miscarriage. It was a quote typical miscarriage, had another D&C procedure, and then was given the okay to get pregnant again, you know, much more quickly. Got pregnant for a third time, had another miscarriage. And at that point, it was just like shock, I think. It was, and that, this is going to sound really strange, but at that point I started to feel really special. Like, I thought, not in a good way, but I started to feel like, okay, this is weird. And I would never say the word weird about someone else, but that's how I was feeling. Like, this is strange now. This is not a thing that happens. And I immediately felt the medical staff around me feeling that as well. And I remember at that appointment, someone saying IVF, and I just thought like, why would I do that? IVF is for people who can't get pregnant, and that's not my problem. And just another example of my own ignorance, because again, people don't talk about this. And so, yes, IVF ended up being the right path for us, because what we needed to do was pre-implantation genetic testing. And so we did, like I said, 5 rounds of retrievals. That's its own roller coaster. That was interesting because it feels very isolating, but at the same time, you're going in for, constant, sometimes daily, like monitoring and appointments, and you are literally in a packed room of women and some men. And so it's this weird juxtaposition of like, here I am in this waiting room. Everyone is going through some version of what I am going through, but I also feel very alone in this. I didn't really share with many people what I was going through. I was, I've talked to a lot of women for my podcast, and they talk about, I spoke to Tamron Hall, the TV anchor, and she talks about like doing, she was such a great interview. It's coming out shortly. But she did injections like on an airplane under a blanket. She did it in an Uber. She had her niece do one. She had like her hairstylist come over and do one because she didn't want to give it herself, in hotel rooms. And that was the same for me. My husband came to the office. I had to be in the office for Oscars night because it's people. And he came to the office because everything has to be timed. And we like found a conference room on a different floor and he gave me my injection. And I thought, God, if someone walks by, I'm like, HR is going to get a phone call about me. I'm going to have to give some sort of explanation. But it's weirdly isolating. And then anyway, so, we get healthy embryos. We transferred one. I got pregnant. It stuck. And then I gave birth to my son. So a long journey. And the one thing I will say is that after you go through any sort of pregnancy loss, even if it is the most common kind, that like happy bubble of pregnancy is burst just a little. It's not that I couldn't enjoy it. I really loved being pregnant. But you're no longer going to appointments assuming the best or not thinking of any negative outcomes. So every scan, every appointment is kind of like, okay, let's assume that it will be okay, but who knows? And you're kind of mentally preparing yourself. So it changes
it's a lot of
things.
Mental gymnastics,
So
right?
much,
A lot of
yes.
mental gymnastics to like, I feel this, but I'm going to prepare for here just in case. And I mean, it's you're carrying a baby inside you.
Yeah.
And so it's impossible not to embrace that. And at the same time, there is that worry that goes along with it. And there is for me, there was a sense of responsibility, like if I do everything right, then I will be able to carry you to term. This is what I would think.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah. And so I have this responsibility to bring you into the world. Come to find out later that I had very little to do with actually bringing the baby into the world. The state of the baby, like how much I ate and what I ate and that kind of thing. Like, yeah, that was part of it, but not whether or not the baby was born.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And, it's just, gosh, I really appreciate you telling us this story and that last piece of it. Because you did have more than one miscarriage and because you did more than one round of IVF and you came out at the end with this baby, it could have gone the other way.
Of course.
I don't know if you'd be telling us this story if it had.
Yeah, I really, I mentioned this earlier about other people that they sort of like sometimes they don't open up until they have like the cherry on top, or they're like, but don't worry, it all ends well. I know for sure I would not be sitting here telling you this story if I didn't have my happy, healthy son. I also should acknowledge, like, I was very fortunate and privileged to be able to get all of this medical care and have the option of IVF. I had really good health insurance that allowed that for me. I live in a city where I could walk to my appointments most of the time. That is not available to all women. So I am very grateful that I live in a place and I'm in a situation and I am a person who can tap into all of that. And I recognize that not everyone has that.
And I will just mention that my friend who's in London is getting everything that you described for free over there. It's all covered.
Oh my God.
So there's that
wild.
As well. Yes.
And here we are trying to just fight for 12 weeks of maternity leave over here.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that too. But so I was thinking about that while you were talking of the juxtaposition between the experience here in the States and somewhere where it is covered by healthcare because it's seen differently.
Yeah, right.
It's right because it's classified differently here than it is there.
Yeah.
I did want to talk to you because this was another thing that I loved about our conversation on the phone. And I might get this wrong, but what not to say when people are struggling with fertility or have had miscarriages. And I found this thing that said, don't say anything that starts with at least. At least you weren't further along, at least. So tell me what it is that we should not say.
Oh my God,
to
Laura,
someone
this
who's
is
struggling
like
with infertility.
Yeah, this is my favorite topic to educate people on. So yes, anything that starts with at least or anything that starts with why don't you just? So I had someone say, not directly to me, but it was passed along to me, why doesn't she just adopt? Just adopt is a crazy notion. Adopting is expensive and time consuming and not a guarantee and not available to everybody. It also assumes that you know what someone wants.
Right.
So whether it's, why don't you just see this kind of doctor? Why don't you just relax? The word relax, let's all agree that nobody should tell anyone else to relax in any situation. But yeah, I think, certainly, at least you're healthy. At least you have a supportive partner. At least you already have one kid. At least you already have 5 kids. Like, they're well-intentioned, and it's not that they are untrue statements, but they're not helpful. And I think what's so bothersome to me is that it minimizes your grief, and it sort of takes away what you are allowed to feel. So like, okay, so because I have a supportive partner, or because I already have a kid or 5 kids, I'm not allowed to feel sad that I had a pregnancy loss or that I'm doing IVF. It's someone else saying, here's how you should feel. It's saying it in a nicer way than that, but it's not helpful. I think people giving advice, unless you're like a medical professional, I know that it's meant to be helpful, but it's not. It's just not. I think also, like, one thing that really bothered me, even though I tried not to be bothered by it, was like someone giving a really specific anecdote of like, well, I know someone who their situation was exactly like yours, or they had 20 miscarriages and they went on to totally naturally just get pregnant, because like, great for that person. And I hope that I have a happy outcome, but that's not a guarantee. It also, again, implies like, let me tell you what your course of care should be. So I had, I think the worst one I heard was, I was doing acupuncture, and the woman said she knew I was doing IVF. She knew my situation. And she said, I think you should take a break from IVF and just take a few months to relax and then try naturally. And I thought like, and then she told me this whole story about how her like sister-in-law's cousin's friend, it worked for her. And I thought like, that is not what I am here for. So none of that. If you say, how are you feeling? This must be so hard. What can I do for you? Those are the things that are appropriate in my mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, I have a very good friend who had a miscarriage when she was trying for her son that they eventually adopted. And my first instinct was to not call her. Like, I wanted to leave her alone. This is what my thoughts were. I wanted to give her space. What I realized was that I really was just afraid to talk to her during that time. So are cards appropriate? Like, would that have been nice for you to receive a card?
Absolutely. I think any sort of outreach. I think it's the same with when anyone's dealing with any kind of grief.
Yes.
I think we've all, I mean, I've certainly felt like that when someone's going through grief. I think the issue with not reaching out in any way makes you feel like, are they really not going to acknowledge it? Have they forgotten? Do they not care? So, and like a text, I think, acknowledging it is all that needs to happen.
So, and then saying, like you said, like, I'm sorry, I love you.
Yep.
I'm here.
Yeah.
What about this is not your fault? Is that helpful or no?
That's a good question. I don't know. It wouldn't have bothered me, but I don't know that it's necessarily helpful. But I think I never had any feelings of guilt that it was my fault. I was fortunate in that way. I think hearing that from a doctor is really, really reassuring. I definitely wanted to hear it from a doctor. I don't know that would be like the first thing I would say to someone. But I don't know. I think it wouldn't hurt, but I don't know how helpful it would be.
I did see in my research, this one doctor put out this statement he didn't put out a statement. He was being interviewed, and this is what he said. He said, you did nothing to cause this, and you could have done nothing to cause this, short of jumping out of a plane. There is nothing you could have done. It is something that happens for a number of reasons that we know, a number of reasons we still don't know. Nothing you have or haven't done could have changed the outcome. This is not your fault. And this is just something in one form or another that he says to his patients, who do come in wondering if it's something that they did or didn't do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I didn't know if it would be appropriate to hear that, or if that would be helpful, rather, to hear that from one woman to another, or from one human to another. But
I think it couldn't hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. So, last thing I want to talk about is you've gone through this experience, like which you said it's fairly new, right? Because Rio, that's his name.
Yeah.
Your son. Is that okay to say? I didn't.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. Rio's just over a year now.
He is 17 months today, I think. Yeah.
17 months. Happy 17 months, Rio.
Yeah.
So your journey is fairly new.
It is.
What made you decide to do this now, to do this podcast now, and what do you do to get people to be so vulnerable with you? Because I was really impressed by that. That's why I pulled over and cried, was the instant
Laura.
vulnerability. So those two things, why did you decide to do it? And what do you think allows that to happen?
I decided to do it because I thought that women wanted to hear these stories. I thought, People is a great platform for this. We have a huge audience. We're really trusted. Celebrities come to us and know that we will tell their story with a lot of thought and with a lot of respect. We don't do gossip. We don't do gotcha journalism. We want to be really mindful in a safe space for celebrities to talk. Like I said, I wanted to destigmatize these things. I have friends who have gone through surrogacy and IVF and, unplanned pregnancies, and I wanted to do anything I could to remove the shame around those conversations. And in terms of your second question, I don't know that I have like some secret. I've always been good at getting people to talk and to share things. I think I always feel like we're just kind of like two women chatting on the phone. It doesn't feel like it's this big official interview. And like sometimes the celebrities cry, sometimes I cry. I'm not trying to hide my emotions. I always try to set it up as, like when I spoke to Sean, when she was talking about her miscarriage, I said, oh, I felt the same way. Or, oh, did you find that when your doctor said this, you felt this? And I think it's just natural that if you're talking to someone, whether it's one-on-one or for a podcast for a huge audience, this idea of like, what I feel so I can feel safe speaking to you. I mean, Laura, you certainly do a good job of it too. And knowing that you're not trying to make someone feel bad and you're just trying to kind of help further their message. Also, it doesn't hurt that moms love to talk about their kids. So it's, it's funny at the end of every interview, I'm like, thanks so much for taking the time. And they're like, you asked me to talk about my pregnancy and my birth and kids. I could talk for 2 more hours about this. So I'm lucky that it's a happy topic. It ends with a happy story.
It does. It does. I mean, and so that I'm just going to direct people back to Me Becoming Mom, because those are the types of stories that you hear, and they all are familiar voices. But you almost forget they're celebrities, or at least I do. While I'm listening to them, I'm just hearing the stories of these women and their journeys to being a mom. It is nice to hear the voices that you're familiar with, though.
It is.
I wouldn't know Kandi's voice anywhere because I'm a fan of The Real Housewives and Escape, so from way back. But
me too, yeah.
And
but
Hoda,
it's interesting to hear them talk about these really personal, even someone who's on a reality show, to talk about a topic that you're like, oh yeah, you'll really open up about this, and I'm seeing a different side of you.
Well, and I did, because I thought I knew her journey from The Real Housewives of Atlanta, because they did show so much.
Yep.
But in listening to your episode with her, I didn't know so much that went on.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Thank you so much, Zoe. Tell me where people can find you.
So all of my work is on people.com, and then the podcast is Me Becoming Mom, and it's available everywhere. And then I'm on Instagram. I'm ZoE MARIANNA at Zoe Mariana.
Oh, okay. don't know if I knew that. So I will
It's my middle
definitely
name.
follow you.
It's a mix of my
Okay.
two grandmothers' names, Marcia and Hannah. So,
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, thank you so much. This has been so great. It's exactly the conversation I wanted to have.
oh, thank you.
And
I
you
love
were the
chatting
right
with
person
you.
to have it with. Yeah.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thanks, Zoe.
I'm Zoë Ruderman, and I'm the only one in the room talking to women about becoming a mom.